morning. It's nobody's favorite time of the week again. First of all, it's not even Wednesday, it's Thursday. I forgot about this. I was waiting until Wednesday to make the video and then I forgot about it. Now it's Thursday. So someone had put it, I don't remember who it was. I think his name was Ehrlich. That's right. I'm just going off memory now. And I want to thank Ehrlich for asking the question. One of my Ask the Rabbi Wednesday videos, I don't remember which one it was, but Ehrlich asked the question, if there's a bracha in living in the land of Israel and in supporting the current state of Israel. I asked a question which I didn't receive the answer yet, and so I'll answer in both ways. My question to that question was, when you say, is there a bracha, are you asking a liturgical question, or are you asking a, I guess we could say, metaphysical question, or what is, when you say bracha, blessing, what do you mean? Do we have in our liturgy a blessing to recite for the mitzvah, Asher kitshanu mitzvosav tzivanu al mitzvahs yishuv eretz Yisrael, let's say, such a bracha. Although I don't know what there was at the time when Joshua conquered the Holy Land in biblical times, perhaps at that time there was such a bracha. One could perhaps say that the second bracha of benching that we say in the Birkas Hamazon, in the grace after meals, which is attributed to Joshua by our sages, which ends off, which is a blessing of thanksgiving, which ends off al haaretz val hamazon, to be a blessing of thanksgiving for the land and for the food. And there is mention of Eretz Chemda Tov Rechava. There's mention in that blessing of the land that was given to us at the time, being a Chemda is like desirable, Tova is good, Rechava is wide, expansive. That's what every time we eat bread, we're supposed to afterwards, after we conclude our meal, we're supposed to recite 4 blessings. The second of which is a blessing specifically for Eretz Yisrael. So that could perhaps be the liturgical blessing, as far as a blessing of Asher Kedishanu Mitzvosav Tzivanu Al Mitzvahs Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Let's say such a nusach does not exist. Such a liturgy does not exist. That there's a blessing like we say on other mitzvos. So it's not birkas of mitzvos. There's many reasons why that could be. Perhaps first and foremost is because it's a matter of dispute as to whether or not Yishuv Eretz Yisrael is one of the 613 mitzvos. The Rambam does not count it as one of the 613 mitzvos. The Ramban does. The argument between the Rambam and the Ramban is as follows. There are many statements throughout the Bible that are not considered by our sages to be from the 613 mitzvos. The Rambam, Maimonides, identifies 14 shirashim, 14 roots that can identify as to whether a command is one of the 613. And so among those roots is that if a command was only given to be done one time and did not apply for all future generations in some form, even if it doesn't apply in all the time, but if it's something that, and this is something that people often misunderstand the Ramban when he argues on the Rambam. But when what the Rambam is meaning is, for example, in the book of Numbers, God commands Moses, make for yourself a seraph, which Moses interprets to mean, and the Torah tells us means, even though it's not exactly what's being said, a fiery serpent, a brazen copper image of a snake, and put it up on a pole. That's incidentally, and the people who were bitten by the snakes will be healed if they look at this snake on the pole. Incidentally, that's why the symbol of a doctor is a snake wrapped around a pole. A lot of people, I remember when I was a kid, I asked my mother about that. She said, I think it has something to do with the ancient Greeks or something like that, with the Hippocratic Oath or something. And the fact of the matter is no, it's from our Holy Torah. And it was a command that God gave to Moses. However, since that is a one-time command that does not apply in future generations, this is not considered to be one of the 613. So it seems that the argument between the Rambam, Maimonides, and the Ramban, Nachmanides, the Rambam, Maimonides, not counting in his count of 613 commandments, Kibush Eretz Yisrael or Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, the conquering of the Holy Land, or the settling of the Holy Land, living in the Holy Land. He does not count it as one of the 613. Nachmanides does, and Nachmanides, the question is, because the Torah says to conquer the land, the question is the conquest something that is done only one time? Is the conquest, something that's continual? Or is the conquest something that is done, it can be done more than once, essentially. Maimonides, the Rambam, seems to indicate that once Joshua conquered the Holy Land, or perhaps once David completed the conquest of the Holy Land, the conquest was done once and for all time. It was complete. Nachmanides seems to indicate that no, when Ezra, that when Joshua did it, he did it one time, then David expanded it, then they left the 70 years of exile, and they were not allowed to live in the land during the exile, and then when they came back, it was not based on the original conquest of Joshua or the expansion of the conquest by David, but it was a new conquest in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, Ezra and Nehemiah. And because of that, it was something that was noheg l'doros, the Ramban says, which is one of the Rambam's shroshim. And people often misunderstand what the Ramban is saying. The Samarov explains very beautifully in the Maimer Yishuv Eretz Yisrael and the Vayel Moshe, and that's very clearly the pshat, that the Ramban was explaining in accordance with the Rambam's understanding of the 14 shroshim, the roots of what defines something as a mitzvah. That's not to say that it applies today to conquer the land, but that is something that applied more than once. It wasn't only in the time of Joshua and then it was done for all time, but what the Ramban is really saying is that there's the argument now, Is Jerusalem the eternal capital of the Jewish people? There's whole arguments on YouTube over the statements, and it's pretty clear from Chazal that it's not universally accepted as such. Some sages said it is, and some sages said it isn't in the Talmud, and so you cannot say that it's a universally accepted concept. But all of this being said, the difference between the Rambam and the Ramban is, the question is, for example, according to Ramban, it would seem that there is it's not eternal, that it gets lost, and then when Mashiach comes, will be regained, essentially. And Samarov points out very wisely that the Ramban makes a difference between conquering the Holy Land in its proper time and a fulfillment of that aspect of living in the Holy Land that is fulfilled even in the time of exile, because the Ramban has a separate clause to explain that to live in Eretz Yisrael even during the time of Golus without a political kibush, without a conquest, is a fulfillment of the mitzvah of settling the Holy Land, of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael and Chibas Haaretz. Again, the Rambam does not include this in the 613 mitzvos. However, obviously it's clear that so many of the mitzvos of the 613 rely on the Holy Land that we could say that even if it's not one of the 613, as the Rambam doesn't include it as one of the 613, that when one is there, one can fulfill mitzvos that one cannot fulfill elsewhere. And due to the fact that it's a question, so liturgically we have a blessing of thanksgiving for the land, but we do not have a blessing for the mitzvah of settling the land, because it's a matter of dispute, and we do not recite a blessing on a mitzvah that's a matter of dispute. So the first possibility that it's liturgical is it's liturgical in the sense of thanksgiving, that after and this is a blessing we say anywhere in the world, after we eat bread, after we finish a meal that includes bread, the meal should begin with bread, we wash and make hamotzi, and then there are 4 blessings that are recited after, and so the second of those blessings was written by Joshua, according to our sages, in order to, as a matter of thanksgiving for the land. It should be noted that the last blessing to be added was the 4th blessing, Hatov HaMeitiv, which was added after the miracle that the Harugei Beisar, the people of Beitar, were allowed to be buried with a proper burial, and that their bodies did not decompose after, it was, I think, well over a year from their unfortunate death until they were allowed to be buried. It should be noted that Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, wrote in his commentary on the Siddur that the reason why that 4th blessing was added was to remind us that we are not supposed to take over the Holy Land while we are in exile, but wait patiently for the Messiah to come. And so Birkas Hamazon has that balance in the 2nd and 4th blessing. The 2nd blessing, we give thanksgiving for the land in the past, but the fourth blessing, we essentially recognize that right now is not the time. And so it's that fourth blessing of Atova Meitiv is essentially, according to Rav Hirsch, an anti-Zionist blessing. And Rav Hirsch was in a way very influential in the modern Orthodox world. So the modern Orthodox world should, I think, be open to the possibility of anti-Zionism within modern Orthodoxy. I'm not saying that all modern Orthodox have to be anti-Zionist, but there seems to be this presupposition that if you're modern Orthodox, you have to be a religious Zionist. And I think there should be an open-mindedness to accept that there is more than one view that is kosher, and that one could be modern Orthodox and still be an anti-Zionist. You don't have to be a Satmar Chassid or a Brisker to be an anti-Zionist. I remember Meir Kahana, Hashem Yimkom Damai, he used to say like that. He said, if you have a TV in your house, you're modern Orthodox, so why should you care what Rav Shach says about Israel? You're modern Orthodox, you have to be religious Zionist. That's intellectually dishonest. As much as Meir Kahana said that the modern Orthodox should be learning the teachings of the Satmar Rav and so forth, and even though he disagrees with them, and should be learning the teachings of Rav Shach and so forth, but and whoever else, and all the Gedolei Yisrael. It's Torah, and yet we need to learn it. People forget that Meir Kahana said that. I know one fine Yuman from Eretz Yisrael, a big chassid of Meir Kahana, but also a big chassid of Rabbi Victor Miller. And he didn't see it as a stira, and I think that's a healthy attitude, that you can be equally respectful of the very extreme Zionist and the very extreme anti-Zionist, and see them both as role models and as tzaddikim, even if they disagreed. And the fact of the matter is, from what I understand, they had respect for each other to a certain extent as well. This younger man told me that he heard Rabbi Victor Miller, who I had the schus of meeting, say that Meir Kahana, he knows, and that he's Ner L'Chiyid. Again, obviously Rav Miller disagreed with Meir Kahana's views on Zionism, but he could still see him as an Ner L'Chiyid. So this, in a way, segues to the other possibility. Is there a blessing in living in the Holy Land and in supporting the current state of Israel? These are two radically different questions that have two different answers. And in a way, what we discussed, what we mentioned, of how the Rambam says that living in Eretz Yisrael he doesn't count as one of the 613 mitzvos, but obviously a great deal of the mitzvos, very many of the mitzvos, I would say perhaps most of the 613 mitzvos, require being in Eretz Yisrael, require Beis HaMikdash. Most of these mitzvos do not apply today, which would again, the fact that the Korban Tamid and the Korban Pesach are including the 613 mitzvos go and prove the Satmar Rav's reading of the Ramban that the Ramban did not say that conquering the Holy Land applies today. When he says it's a mitzvah noeg l'doros, what he means is that just like there's a mitzvah to bring a korban tamid when we have a Beis HaMikdash, so too when the conditions are met, there's a mitzvah of kibush Eretz Yisrael according to the opinion of the Ramban, and according to the opinion of the Rambam, it was something that was done already and does not need to be done again. And that's how we learn the stira, the machlokes, not the stira, the machlokes the argument between Nachmanides and Maimonides as far as counting living in the Holy Land is one of the 613 mitzvahs. But as we said, to live in the Holy Land is a hechsher mitzvah. It's impossible to do many of the other mitzvahs without living in the Holy Land. The question is that a blessing or a curse? Remember, Moses told the people, "Behold, I present you today a blessing and a curse, life and death. I ask you to choose life." Choosing life doesn't just mean like politically today, although I'm certainly in pro-life politically, except for the case of where mother's life is in danger, which is also pro-life, and it's universally pro-life. My personal views on the matter, including in light of what my holy ancestor, the Chavas Yor Paskin, on the subject, which really isn't clear. He makes it very clear that abortion is a sin. But these words in the Bible, V'charta l'chaim, choose life, have nothing to do with abortion. They have to do, or abortion is only a very small part of what it means. Choose life means to choose to do mitzvos and to live a life of Torah and mitzvos. That's the real life. Torah and mitzvos are life. A life dedicated to God is true life, and a life that's not dedicated to God is death, according to Deuteronomy. The question is, what should be our approach to mitzvos? This is a complicated issue. The Chazon Ish said very beautifully, and I agree strongly with him, that we should not see the 613 mitzvos as 613 obstacles, but as 613 opportunities. However, that being said, still, the opportunities are not necessarily consistent and always proper to do. Because, first of all, the opportunities can be fulfilled in various ways. Nobody says, I'm in a perfect marriage, but one of the 613 mitzvahs is divorce, so I have to divorce my wife to fulfill that mitzvah. No one would say such a thing. Chas v'shalom. Divorce is only a mitzvah when it's unfortunately necessary. It's not something to strive after just because it's one of the 613 commandments. And many of the other commandments, just because something is commanded doesn't mean that it's ideal. There's a mitzvah of Eishes Yifas Toar. It doesn't mean it's something that you have to run after to fulfill. Just because it's one of the 613 commandments. What it is that, more or less, is that if someone would be in such a situation, this is the way it's regulated, really, more or less, rather than to say this is what is something that's a pious and proper thing to do. And it's clear from the sages that it's something that's not really promoted. There's a mitzvah of the Ben Soramora, which our sages says never was and never will be, the rebellious son. The Ir Nidachas, the cities that are apostate cities, also, the sages says never was, never will be. So just because something is in the Bible doesn't mean that's what we have to do. That's one aspect. Another aspect is even if something is something we're supposed to do, you can't get carried away with it. Or it's not for everybody to get carried away with it. There's a mitzvah to wear tefillin. In the old days, people wore tefillin all day. And it came to a certain point where today very, very few people wear tefillin all day. There are people who wear tefillin all day, but very few people. And generally it's understood that we should not spend too much time wearing tefillin. The reason is because we're not on the level to do it. The same thing. Women wearing tefillin. A woman is under no obligation to wear tefillin. But according to some opinions, a woman could wear tefillin. And the question has to be asked is it proper? And essentially, a woman wearing tefillin is similar to a man wearing tefillin all day. So if it's a woman on the level of Scheinberg, who's a friend of Racha, who's a big tzaddik, so a tzaddik who's on his level, I would say could wear tefillin every day, according to some opinions. There are opinions that it's forbidden for a woman to wear tefillin at all, because it's lo silbash simlas gever. It says like that in Targum Yonason. But there are other opinions that say no, a woman who is on the level, same thing, a child who's under bar mitzvah, he's under no obligation to wear tefillin. Generally we start, a month before. Some people that start even earlier. That's the question you have to ask. When is it right? Are you on such a level? When is it right? When is it wrong to be wearing tefillin? And so too, I think this is probably the best analogy we could give. Now, you're not allowed to wear tefillin, and you're not allowed to pass gas while you're wearing tefillin. Excuse me for mentioning such a thing, but it's a law like that, and so that's one of the reasons why. And you're supposed to have clean thoughts, and it's assumed that a man can't keep his mind clean the whole day. So you're lucky if you can wear tefillin for 20 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours if you're, but more than that, most people can't handle that. And people who are Yechidei Segula, it's a blessing for them. People who are on a very high spiritual level, it's a tremendous blessing for them to wear tefillin all day. But people who are on a low spiritual level, it's probably problematic for them to wear tefillin even for a brief time. It's very questionable, this practice what Chabad does, putting tefillin on people on the street, not because you don't know if they're really Jewish or not, but rather because how do you know they have a guf naki? How do you know, are you insulting the tefillin by putting the tefillin on this person? I mean, I saw a picture of a Chabad shliach having a Jewish apostate who became a Catholic priest, and because his mother's Jewish, the Catholic priest, because his mother's Jewish, he having him shake a lulav with his collar on and everything, and I'm sure he would put tefillin on him also if he could. And it's really a shaila that the act of shaking the lulav could be, maybe according to some opinions, a shaila of avodah zarah. Most likely not, but for a Jew maybe yes, and it could be. There are all kinds of issues with this. It's not so cut and dry, these types of questions. And so sometimes, if someone is not doing things properly, the mitzvah itself could be more of a curse than as a blessing. And you could actually be violating halacha in an attempt to do what's right, like we see the story with Shaul HaMelech and Shmuel HaNavi. King Saul went and fought a war with Amalek, and he went and Samuel told him to destroy all the animals. And Saul came back and he said, Baruch Hashem, I did what you told me to do. I fought my war with Amalek. And then Samuel said, well, what's this baaing I hear? What's this bleating of the sheep and goats that I hear in my ears? He said, well, we brought these for sacrifices to your God. I said, that's not what God wants. God wants obedience and not sacrifice. Meaning, the greater sacrifice is obedience and not just, slaughtering an animal when it's above and beyond the call of duty. And so too, if someone, today would make kosher b'chutz, it's a grave sin to the point where most Jews are afraid to even eat an animal that wouldn't be kosher for a sacrifice at all, like a chicken or a turkey, and eating such an animal roasted on Pesach, lest one be mistaken that that's the Korban Pesach, and so they insist on adding some liquid to the cooking in order to avoid the shail of kachim b'chutz. So, this being said, there is a lot to discuss of the shaila of what we are accomplishing when we're keeping a mitzvah. Are we doing it properly or improperly? And so, living in Eretz Yisrael, you have more obligations, you have more and more chances to mess up. So if you think you can handle it, it's a big blessing. But if you're going to be disrespectful to the land, it's a curse. If you're gonna, there was someone, he asked Moshe Leib Sasaver, he said, I want to move to Eretz Yisrael. So he said, if you're on the level where you can live, he said, Eretz Yisrael is a holy land, the synagogue is a holy place. If you're on the level that you could live 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in a synagogue, and never do anything that desecrates the synagogue, then you're ready to live in the Holy Land. Now, most Jews who live in the Holy Land, even religious Jews, they're not living like they're in the synagogue all the time. I remember when I was in Eretz Yisrael, the first year or so, I was able to hold in a very holy state. And eventually I just lost it. I started to have struggles I didn't have most of the time when I was there. And just before I left, I had some really major struggles. And I was kind of cursed for it, I see. And Eretz Yisrael is like being in a synagogue. If you can't handle living 24/7 in the synagogue, then living in Eretz Yisrael is going to be a curse. If you can handle that, it's a blessing, but very, very few people are on that level. I would say most people in Eretz Yisrael, including most of the Haredim in Eretz Yisrael, are just not on that level, that they can really live up to what they need to be living in Eretz Yisrael. That's in a spiritual sense. In a halachic sense, it's even more serious, because there are so many laws that apply in Eretz Yisrael that don't apply outside. And so if you can keep those laws, beautiful. But you're going to wind up messing up things, you're much better off living in America than living in Eretz Yisrael, because if you're going to eat fruit and the fruit's not kosher because the tithes and offerings were not taken properly, you're robbing from God, it says in Malachi in the Bible. If you do keep the laws of the tithes and offerings, God will pour out upon you blessings that will be emptying out blessings upon you that you won't be able to say enough. So you have to find a balance. If you're able to keep these things, you're going to keep the sabbatical year. It's very difficult. You're going to keep all of these laws. It'll be a blessing. But if you're going to go there and you're not going to keep those laws, it's a curse. And so that's what you have to figure out. That's part of the reason God, in His mercy, sent us into exile. Because God wanted to have a strong relationship with us. I remember Rabbi Arlovsky, Zolka Zunzain, he said the following mashal. He said if there was a little kid who 1 week he brought his mother flowers on Kavod Shabbos, right, Friday, and the mother was so happy, and it made them feel so close together, and that he started doing this every week until 1 week he was running late, he was playing too late, and he's like, oh, I forgot the flowers, and he quickly ran and got some flowers. Ma, here's your flowers. The mother's going to say, I don't need your flowers, I need your love. And so if handling this with the flowers is too much for you, I'll make it easier for you. And so God in His mercy put us into exile. 613 mitzvahs is too much, all right. You know, there's a Sefer Mitzvahs, a Kotzer from the Chavetz Chaim, and this is about 130 mitzvahs or so that we can do. Do those, you have your tefillin, your siddur, your davening, and make a relationship with me, God says, with those. All this is too much. This is what all the prophets were upset about with the sacrifices. They didn't mean to violate the Torah and not bring sacrifices. Their point was that the sacrifices had a purpose of giving you a relationship with God, and if you weren't living up to it, you're missing out. And so it's not an absolute, the way the Kukians, the religious Zionists, will have you believe that if you don't live in Eretz Yisrael, you're not part of the Klal Yisrael, you're not part of the Jewish people. No. For certain people who are on a very high spiritual level, they can manage with Eretz Yisrael. For the average Jew, it's way too hard. It's way too difficult. And I would say, including for most people who live in Eretz Yisrael, it's way, way too difficult to really be on that level. But if you can manage it, do it. But it's, as much as we see people discourage potential converts from converting to Judaism, I think it's much more, I kind of frown on that personally. I think just people should be educated and recognize what they're getting into. And if they're ready for it, it's very good. And if they have other reasons, there are many reasons why it's beneficial to convert to Judaism. That being said, you have to find, where to go, what to do, you have to find the balance. And I think it's probably more important to discourage people from moving to Eretz Yisrael. I was talking to a pastor who I know about marriage counseling, a chaplain in the county jail nearby, and he said, the way he does marriage counseling is he tries to convince someone not to not to get married, and if they overcome that challenge of trying to be convinced not to get married, that means that they're meant to be married. And if they don't overcome the challenge, it means that they're not meant to get married. And I think we could say the same thing about the Holy Land. And now that's the Holy Land in general in an ideal situation. Now is not an ideal situation. And so the second question is the current state of Israel. When it comes to the current state of Israel, obviously it's a matter of dispute among, there are basically three orthodox opinions of how to approach the current state of Israel. But all of them are unhappy with how the state of Israel is currently. The religious Zionists oppose the current state of Israel as it is as a secular state, and they strive to, whether slowly or quickly, make it into a religious state. The Haredim are much more realistic. They know they're not going to make it to a religious state. And so there's two approaches. One is the Aguda approach to say, let's try to keep the status quo and preserve our rights and our values and our personal way of life without really imposing on others beyond whatever the status quo is. And then there's the anti-Zionist approach, is just like, forget about it. We have nothing to do with it. It's an accursed, horrible state that we don't even want to touch their money. We don't want to vote. We don't want to have any connection to it because it's so wrong and bad and against what the Torah wants from us. So of course, among the religious Zionists, there are those who try to, especially influenced by Rabbi Kook, to try to find something positive even in the non-religious aspects, as being some kind of a stepping stone or something. And that's why they're more or less more patient about it. But still, it's all Orthodox Jews have a problem with how the state of Israel is currently. And to answer that question, you have to ask your own rabbi. And me personally, I feel most comfortable with the anti-Zionist approach. It makes the most sense to me. It seems to be the most moral, ethical, and logical to me. It doesn't have the issues that the other approaches have. But I still have love and respect for other Orthodox Jews who understand things differently or have a different challenge in how they interact with Zionism and with the state of Israel. The answer I would have is, according to the religious Zionist point of view, it's a tremendous blessing to support the state of Israel because it's leading to the Messiah coming. According to the anti-Zionist point of view, which makes the most sense to me and is the point of view that I more or less adopt, although maybe not 100%, but pretty close, I would say it's a tremendous curse to support the current state of Israel, at least to support it as a Jewish state. If you want to support it as a secular, non-sectarian state, particularly in their fight against terrorist elements that are dangerous for the whole world and not just for the Israelis, I'm certainly supportive of that. I'm certainly, I can certainly say that the fact that Israel bombed the Syrian nuclear plants in 2007, as they just admitted, was certainly helpful to the world when you understand how bad Syria is right now and what a danger and how much fighting is going on with Syria right now. So yes, but does that have anything to do with being a Jewish state? No, they could if they would have been able to do that as a total non-sectarian state. I personally would much rather see Israel, for example, annex the land that they won in '67 and declare it a non-sectarian state. Perhaps similar to the United States, we have a constitution, a federalist approach to Israel, I think would be very wise, where Israel could annex the lands that they won and turn the current state of Israel, instead of being one single state, it could be a conglomerate of at least 3, but I think maybe even 4 or 5 or 6 separate states under one constitution, similar to how we have 50 states under one federal constitution, that there are certain things relegated to the federal government and certain things relegated to state and local governments. And so this way, to have a binational state, that would solve. So like Gaza could be one state, and the West Bank could be another, even maybe 2 separate states in the West Bank, and there could be separate states with one federal constitution. Personally, that I think would be the wisest approach to the current issues of the state of Israel. Because, for example, the Palestinians, they argue, if the West Bank and Gaza are not connected, so how can, so if the answer, forget about Palestinian autonomy as total autonomy and independence, but rather partial autonomy in the sense of states' rights. And I think that if you didn't have a federal Jewish government, but only on the state level a Jewish government, that could, and you could also have like separate states for Haredim and for Chilonim and for Dati Lumi, and make several separate states as the United States of Israel/Palestine, like Israelstein, as some people have suggested to call such a thing, which is kind of silly. But that idea of the binational state to be expressed in a context of several states, I think would be quite positive. I thank you for watching. So to answer the questions at the end, to reiterate, there is no liturgical blessing for the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael, but there is a liturgical blessing of thanksgiving as part of the Birkas Hamazon. There is a blessing in living in the Holy Land if you're on the spiritual level to do so, but if you're not, it could actually be a curse, because it could actually be violating many halachos if they're not following things properly in the Holy Land, and it's much more difficult to live in the Holy Land, and there's much more of for many people it's much easier just to live with fewer mitzvos and to try to focus on God with the mitzvos that we have in Chutz La'aretz without trying to gain new things. And then as far as supporting the state of Israel, you have to ask, each camp has their own opinion on that. Obviously the religious Zionists would hold that it is a blessing, and the religious anti-Zionists would hold it's not a blessing, and I personally hold that it is not a blessing. But I think there is still possibility of fixing things. So thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment, all the best.